Hello, everybody. I'd like to urge you to come on down front. It's going to be really hard to see you and see our panelists in their interactions when we have our panel discussion. And so we'd like to see you down here in the front rows if you can. Thanks very much. So we're going to start a session on policies, partnerships, and open data for sustainable development here this morning, and we very much appreciate everybody who is in the audience being with us today. I'm Bill Sonntag, and I work for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. I'm in the international office there, and one of my primary responsibilities for the past 2 years for EPA has been interacting with the State Department and UN in New York during the development of the Sustainable Development Goals and the post-2015 development agenda. So with that, I want to take some time and talk to you about just a few things that I think are important in the open data world at this point. At the end of this meeting, as we are on the third day, it gets a little easier to kind of synthesize some of the things that we've all heard for the past 2.5 days now. And certainly open data is one of the foundational enabling states that's necessary for a lot of the innovation that we've seen described, for a lot of the progress that people are making in citizen science, citizen engagement, better tools, better visualization for policymaking. We're fortunate, I think, in this decade to be in an era when open data and open data policies are becoming more and more prevalent across institutions, across governments, and elsewhere. So it's a growing phenomenon that I think is very much of value to our efforts to improve sustainability, our measurement capability, the metrics that are represented by the Sustainable Development Goals, targets, and indicators. So a few things to bolster that contention on my part. One, I want to mention the Open Government Partnership and the Open Data Charter, which was just adopted, just basically put out for adoption by countries. It has 6 principles that I think are worth mentioning, and that's data that's open by default, timely and comprehensive, accessible and usable, comparable and interoperable, for improved governance and citizen engagement, for inclusive development and innovation. There's going to be an open government partnership meeting in Mexico City on the 27th and 29th of October, where this charter is going to be on the table for country adoption. Again, another instance where we see policy in action. We've had a data.gov, an open government, open data policy in the United States since the beginning of the current administration. At first, it was not something that was all that well received because it was really kind of difficult to use, and people didn't really have the roadmap for how to make use of the data that was put there. There was a decree upon all federal agencies that they were to put their data sets up in data.gov. We ended up with quite a mishmash, but there's been a lot of work done to try and organize that so that it's a bit more usable, a bit more user-friendly, and there are some applications now that are a part of it. So it's been put into a series of particular categories, including an ecosystems hub, which is a very important one for us. The EPA, in fact, provides the Enviro Atlas, a comprehensive atlas down to 30-meter resolution that measures ecosystem services contribution of nature to communities and ecosystems. It's on a stream segment basis. There's also a USGS, United States Geologic Survey system on species incidents that's in there. So the ecosystem part of data.gov has really taken off with some very valuable tools. EPA, again, in this region here, in the Arab region, has created a public participation guide that's been used in Morocco. Also in Chile, it's available in Spanish, Arabic, French, and Chinese, and has been used for public participation seminars and to start the path of public participation in government institutions in a number of instances, so we're fairly proud of that. A quick mention of the Group on Earth Observation, which of course is a co-member of the Eye on Earth Alliance. GEO was one of the first to adopt an open and free data policy and really was in the vanguard of this in the early part of this century. And that has continued through the 15 years, almost 15 years of its existence. Finally, I had been asked by my NASA friends to talk just briefly about a data set that's available, open access, on the ARIS data system at USGS, and that's Shuttle Radar Topography Mission 2, a very recent release of data for the Middle East, of imagery for the Middle East, and I think it's something worth knowing about here and is an example of open data in action. I should have done this to begin with, but I'll do it now. I want to thank the government of Abu Dhabi, Ajiti, and EAD for their sponsorship, the invitation to me and many of my colleagues to be here. I was involved in the first organization of the Eye on Earth conference in 2011. It began with some work that we started to do through UNEP and others in 2009 and 2010, and I was on the stage in Abu Dhabi here in 2011 on capacity building. So this is the second Eye on Earth, and I think this has been just a great conference, and once again appreciate your being here with us this morning. So with that, I'd like to move on to a quick introduction of our panel here, a very esteemed group that has a variety of perspectives, including some of the big data and science perspective, as well as some user perspectives from the NGOs and from the African perspective, which I think is important for us. So let me introduce all of them to you, and then they will speak in turn, and we'll, of course, take some questions and have some discussion at the end. So first, I'd like to introduce Simon Hodson. He is the Executive Director of CODATA. CODATA works to improve the quality and reliability, accessibility in all fields of science, not just geoscience and technology. And I checked this with him. It was established way back in 1966. I'd like to say before I was born, but that's not true. Secondly, Paul Uler is with us today. He is currently a scholar with the National Academy of Sciences in the United States, formerly the director of the Board on Research Data and Information, and is now consulting on research data policy and management. We have Dr. Cheng Liu. Professor Liu is at the Institute of Geographical Sciences and Natural Resources in Beijing, and she's active in the Research Data Alliance and CODATA. And I'd like to note that she and I are both serving on a UNEP Global Environmental Outlook 6 Assessment Methodologies and Data Information Working Group for the current GEO-6. Our last two presenters will be Leda Reinhardt of the Global Policies Director for the European Environmental Bureau. She most recently served as the organizing partner for NGOs and major groups at the UN, facilitating participation of NGOs in the SDG post-2015 development agenda process, and I can assure you that must have been a management challenge, and we certainly appreciate her efforts in that regard. I'd finally like to introduce Dr. Chukwudozie Izabaliki. He is with the UN Economic Commission for Africa. He is the director, or pardon me, chief of the data technology section, and most recently has been the leading light behind the formation of the recent African Data Consensus. So that distinguished panel will speak to you for the next a number of minutes. I'd like to invite Simon Hodson to the podium. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, mic is working, all is good. Thank you very much, Bill, for that introduction. I'm Simon Hodson, Executive Director of CODATA. CODATA stands for the Committee on Data. It's part of the International Council of Science. And as Bill said, we work internationally. We've got international members, and we work internationally to promote the availability and the quality and reusability of research data. So I was asked to talk about our activities in terms of data policy and in terms of capacity building. So that's what I intend to do. And I'm realizing that some of my prompt notes are not going to be easy to read unless I stand a little bit nearer to the front. So bear with me. We've heard a lot in the last 3 days about the data revolution, the changes in IT, our ability to create data, to reuse it. This is changing the way that we conduct research, and it's presenting us with huge opportunities for the effectiveness and the implementation of that research. It also presents immense challenges. How can we take true advantage of that revolution? And I think that's something that this panel is intending to address. 2 particular ways, which I think are the themes of this panel discussion, are through data policies and through capacity building, or capacity mobilization, perhaps is a better word, allowing those skills and infrastructure to emerge and promoting those skills and infrastructure to emerge on a genuinely global level, so that the advantages can truly be taken of the data revolution. So exploiting the opportunities, we argue, in CODATA is the major challenge of international science now. And there are challenges for the infrastructure, both in terms of network and compute and storage, but also in terms of human infrastructure and skills. And that leads us on to the second challenge, which is the policy area, the methodological issues, the cultural issues in the way that science and research are conducted. Doing science more in the open, making data that's created through analysis more available for assessment and for reuse. And so this presents challenges of cultural change for science systems, for infrastructure, and the way science is conducted. So one of the principles that we argue, which was made in the Royal Society report in red there, Science as an Open Enterprise, is that data for research should be intelligently open. And that means it's accessible, that it's accessible, you can understand where it came from and how it was created, that it's intelligible, you can understand it, you can understand the implications of those data, and it's usable. And those principles, we heard a version of them related by Bill, those principles are becoming part of the new culture of doing science. I mentioned 2 other reports which you may be familiar with, Creating a World That Counts, which highlights the changes due to the data revolution, and a report from GODAN and the Open Data Institute on how we can use open data to improve agriculture, food and nutrition. And that's an important report because it provides a lot of concrete examples of initiatives which are building on open data to improve agriculture and nutrition. That's some of the context then for the work we do. Short introduction to CODATA. On the left there you have Geoffrey Bolton, Professor Geoffrey Bolton, who was the lead author of that Royal Society report on open data, and the new CODATA Executive Committee. I presented that challenge. How do we respond? 3 strategic areas of activity within CODATA, working on the area of data policies to support implementation of open data principles and practice, to adapt to the transformation and research from a technical level, so looking at the frontiers of the new data science, of the analysis, the storage of large data quantities, and running how to analyze big data effectively, and to promote data skills, so the capacity building side, and we also address capacity building from a science system approach, which I'll go into a little bit. So, having given that background and highlighted those strategies, I'm going to talk about some examples of the work that CODATA does. We promote and have promoted over many years open data policies. And we do that primarily now through activities with partner organizations and through a data policy committee, which provides expert input for partner organizations and for policy documents that we create. So, for example, up there on the left is an expert report on data policies, which we produced for a Danish e-infrastructure group. And now was originally an advice document and is now openly available, and it's being picked up quite a lot. It outlines some of the key elements which funders of research are using in their open data policies. And we think that was certainly the Danes found that a very useful piece of work, and as it's being picked up, we think it's useful elsewhere. And it's downloadable from Zenoda, which is the European infrastructure for sharing data and reports. We're organizing over the next 18 months a series of data citation workshops, looking at principles and practice, and I'll give a little bit of detail over that. And we're collaborating with the Polish Science Ministry on their data policy development, and with CODATA Kenya on data policy development and data strategy within that country, and specifically with our partner institution there, which is the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. I'll say a little bit about that, how that work came about. First of all, a brief outline of that, the data policy report, which, as I said, identifies the key elements which funders are using in their data policies and which are useful to address. I won't go into that in detail, but that's something which you may find of interest. So how did the work in Kenya come about, and how is that leading on to broader capacity building and data policy activities? Last August 2014, we organized through a CODATA task group led by Liu Shuang, who's here on the panel, a workshop in Kenya based partly at the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology for a training part, and also the UNESCO site in Kenya. It was a research workshop and a policy workshop, and it developed a set of principles for open data sharing in developing countries. However, we also had strong support of that workshop from Cabinet Secretary Fred Matiang'i, who came and gave one of the most informed presentations on open data from a politician that I've had the pleasure of hearing. And he announced that a data center would be established at Jomo Kenyatta University as a center of excellence. And that indeed happened. And subsequently, CODATA has been working with that center and the director of that center on developing their data policies and their processes, and I think with the support of the Chinese Academy of Science, also on some of their data infrastructure. So that's capacity building in a particular institution, and we're working with the Kenyan National Academy of Sciences to try and broaden that activity. Kenya is a country which is embracing open data a great deal. Our colleagues at Jomo Kenyatta University went to the Open Data Forum in Kenya recently and reported back on that, and there's a lot of activity there, and we hope to be able to contribute to that in a positive way. As I said, we're part of the International Council of Science, and this year, in December, the International Council of Science, with partner organizations, the Inter-Academy Panel, the International Social Science Council, and the World Academy of Sciences, is convening something called Science International, which is intended as a coordinated policy statement for science, which will happen annually and which will represent those organizations and the organizations and membership that those organizations represent, if you follow my meaning. And as such, it can purport to be an important international voice for science and research. CODATA has been asked to lead on that first edition, and we're preparing a policy document on big data and open data. And I'll go into that a little bit more to show the links between those two phenomena and how if research and science are to advance as we want, they need to be interdependent. And we're also developing, for launch at that meeting, a proposal for a broader open science capacity building initiative. So this is a little diagram to show the interdependence of open data and big data and how we're expressing that in the policy document and the proposal for the capacity building initiative. Big data, as I've said, is one of the challenges of our age. How do we look after all this data? How do we analyze it effectively? But it depends fundamentally on open approaches to research and the availability of those data. And it's important that we shouldn't lose sight of that and that we should continue the efforts that are being made to make data more available for reuse. This fundamentally depends upon national policies and e-infrastructure and institutional management and support. And that's where the capacity building activity comes in. None of this can be realized without those capacity building activities. And of course, just a reminder that the objective of all this isn't to produce infrastructure and open data and big data for its own self, but to produce those knowledge outputs. And we need to track that through the chain. So we talk a lot in our policy documents and the sort of work that we're doing for Science International about a research ecosystem. And this is the sort of proposal that we're making as part of that capacity building activity, the sort of things that need to be addressed internationally and at a national level. Good science system governance. How is the system governed? How do you make it accountable? Well, for that, we propose that each country that we're working with set up an open data forum to develop open data policies. And that forum would comprise the key stakeholders of the science and the data systems. So the funders, the data centers, the libraries, the people that work in the universities, research groups. There's been a lot of work in Europe, to some extent in North America, and more recently in South Africa, on road mapping the requirements for open and big data. And we think that's good practice, which should be developed further internationally. Training and skills initiatives are essential for the reasons that I've stated, as are addressing the incentives for open data. And I'll talk a little bit about data citation in that context. And then...
I'd like to mark the time, please.
Okay, how long?
A couple more minutes.
Okay, I'll have to rush through them. And then flagship co-designed research projects to show the benefits of the open data approach. So I'm going to quickly, in the last 2 minutes, skip through 2 examples of CODATA initiatives which address some of these issues of open data and big data, and try to address the culture and capacity building activities. So data citation. Why is data citation important? Citation is one of the key motivations that researchers have to make their research open. And if we want data to be included in that process, then it's important that making data available for reuse should be recognized and cited. How do we develop that culture and the practice of data citation? It's a matter of cultural change. It's a matter of including data products in the reference list in journals and making it possible to cite data. There's a report that was produced by a CODATA task group out of sight, out of mind, and CODATA contributed to a statement of data citation principles. And now the activity of that task group is being taken internationally with a series of stakeholder workshops to try and turn those principles into practice, and examining how we do that internationally, but also on a national level with key stakeholders. And the last example is our training capacity building activities. CODATA organizes a lot of training workshops in data science to develop those data analysis skills which we've talked about. In the last 18 months, we've organized one in Beijing which was followed up in Bangalore, and there was a shorter workshop in Kenya. Not on that slide is a workshop that we ran recently in Jakarta. And each of those are linked as well. There were some participants at each of those workshops that went along and then helped to organize the subsequent workshop. And this is one of those organizers, Chung, who's just had good success with his programming in R. We're now working with the Research Data Alliance on a series of ongoing data science workshops, and they address an identifiable need for the development of data science skills internationally. And as has been done, we're paying a great attention to a reusable curriculum, reusable materials, and a train-the-trainer approach so that the program can expand. With considerable support from the International Center of Theoretical Physics, who hosts a lot of training and research events, we'll be hosting the first of this new series of data science summer schools next summer in August at the ICTP in Trieste. There are places, accommodation, and board for up to 120 students. We already have funding for travel for 30 to 40 students, and we're looking for further funding. So that will be happening. There are details there on that slides. And it's something that we'd like to expand beyond that. We're speaking to partners of how we can take that basic data science course internationally in a similar way that we're doing with the data citation activity. And then finally, this is a sort of a nod in the direction of Chung's success, most proud. We want to expand that, those training activities a great deal. We're already in discussion with the SKA and with CERN about more advanced courses hosted at CERN and in South Africa. And we'd like to speak to partners at this conference about how we can work with you on developing further that international training program for data science. Thank you very much, and sorry for running over. Okay. But you'll still need this.
Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to be here with you today. My name is Paul Uler. I'm sharing with you a focus summary of a white paper on the value of open data sharing that I prepared on behalf of CODATA, which you just heard about, for the Group on Earth Observations plenary meeting next month. I don't have any slides, primarily because the paper is not finalized and has not been published yet by GEO. So I'll share a summary of the findings, but I'm sorry I do not have slides to share with you today. So by open data, I mean I use the online open knowledge definition of, quote, data that can be freely used, reused, and redistributed by anyone, subject only at most to the requirement to attribute and share alike. By this, I am not advocating that all data should be openly and freely available. There are, of course, many reasons why, or to keep some data more proprietary or secret than others, although they need to be balanced against the benefits of openness discussed here. Such countervailing reasons include restrictions based on protection of national security, law enforcement, personal privacy, and commercial proprietary concerns. Less well-known and narrower motivations include protections of indigenous peoples' rights, the exact location of cultural artifacts or endangered species, and access and benefit sharing of genetic resources. At the same time, there are intrinsic benefits that can be realized from the open provision of data on global digital networks. These benefits or reasons support the open and unrestricted availability of data, especially data produced by governments or with public money, as a default rule. There are, in fact, several major trends that have been that have made open and unrestricted uses of public data important, including especially the rise of digital networks and the internet and related technologies, and the collection and uses of massive big data sets. Very large and increasingly urgent global public interest challenges face humanity in many forms that have already been discussed at this conference in the past 2 days. They include climate change, environmental degradation, the management of common resources, food security, and health concerns. So open data support and are supported by these larger trends. Indeed, there are many diverse opportunities and benefits to be derived from providing open data and unrestricted use worldwide. I will summarize the main reasons which are explored in greater detail in the white paper, which will be openly available on the GEO website later this year. Perhaps most important are the many economic benefits to both public and private sectors. Public Earth observation data have been shown to be economic force enhancers, creating value many times over and providing much greater returns on the public investment than restrictive proprietary approaches. The generative effects from open data on digital networks are key in this regard. And there are many studies that have compared closed and open policies for public data, which support all these conclusions. Social welfare is enhanced for both individuals and society at large. Open Earth observation data meet society's expectations of appropriate management of public digital resources, provide reputational benefits, and incorporate ethical principles on access and use of the public data. Public research and private innovation opportunities expand with a policy of openness for upstream data resources. Open data can substantially reduce unproductive barriers to interdisciplinary, interinstitutional, and international research. They enable automated knowledge discovery in a growing sea of big data that people cannot possibly comprehend themselves. The mining of very large databases is a key to the efficient and productive uses. Indeed, open data help avoid many inefficiencies, such as the unnecessary duplication of research and the identification of erroneous results. They promote new and more research and include the interoperability of and combination of diverse data. Open data are essential for the verification of research results and in generating broad trust in them. This has been an abiding principle since for many centuries of the scientific process. Citizen scientists and crowdsourcing approaches are facilitated as well. And open public upstream data stimulate downstream commercial research and applications that benefit all economies and the larger society. Closely related to the public research opportunities is that the education of new generations is significantly enhanced. Open Earth observation data promote the education of new students and the public, whether at school, in higher education, or at home. They also support important studies of data collection methods and management. This is why nonprofit research and education were given special status in GEO's first data sharing principles, as well as in many organizations and countries. Finally, there are key advantages for improved governance. Open Earth observation data support improved decision-making, and transparency in government and society. They demonstrate leadership at home and abroad, thereby enhancing influence and legitimacy. For less economically developed countries, open data policies promote capacity building and help to implement repatriation objectives such as samples digital samples from natural history museums. Not least, open public data, especially from multiple sources online, generally build freedom in society and trust in governance and its many functions. So the white paper gives some real-world examples and many references for all these diverse benefits. But in the interest of time here, I cannot get into such specifics. In sum, however, both the public, providers, and all users of data stand to gain much more than they lose from making their public Earth observation data available on a full and open basis. They also avoid all the negative effects and lost opportunity costs that come with attempts at narrow cost recovery by individual ministries or organizations and by policing leakage in the restricted uses of their data. So it is therefore imperative to seize the many benefits from publicly generated Earth observation data now with a default rule of open access and unrestricted use. In conclusion, I leave you with some questions to consider in the subsequent panel discussion that we'll have. Do you agree with a policy of open access and unrestricted use to publicly generated data as a default rule? If so, why? And if not, why not? Are there special circumstances not mentioned in this presentation that can make such a default rule problematic? And from your experience, what are some network effects of placing data openly on digital networks that are particularly compelling? I look forward to your questions and comments, and thank you for your attention.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Simon and Paul. They had described the data policy. I talk about from another dimension, implementation dimension, how the data sharing policy could be affected in developing countries. So the 12 years ago, in the World Summit Information Society in the Geneva, and also 10 years ago in the phase 2 in the Tunis phase. So all mentioned about the digital divide. So, but the 10 years later, this year, and and then have data statistics. You see from the figure, you can see that in the more than 1 million data record in the geocode database, and more than 80% is from OECD countries. And you know, in 99 nations in the geo, and about less than one quarter is OECD country. And most of the countries is a developing country. There are very few contribution to the geocode data center database. So this is a big digital divide. So mid of this year, I was invited by the President of the United Nations, General Assembly, to give a speech about how to solve the problem and to reduce the digital divide. I said this, now the scientific research data, not only the data resources, research resources for research, but could be accelerator for the economic, knowledge economic, and to reach the sustainable development goals. As we enter the big data era, the data in the developing countries is even more critical since the digital divide still exists, in some places even expanded. So I said I suggested to United Nations to call all stakeholders, funding agencies, in the universities, research partners, and international organizations all work together. As a partner, we work together to focus on the continue to reduce the digital divide. So last year, as Simon mentioned, last year we all this work together. So you can see all the logos, CODATA, WFEO, UNESCO, GenQuart, and the government also. And then there's so many in the organizations. We work together. And then we discuss how to reduce the digital divide, how to help developing countries to benefit from the big data society. So then we all agreed to have data sharing principles in developing countries. So we called this as the Nairobi data sharing principles. These principles is, of course, is the coordinated with the geo data sharing principles. CODATA, WDS, and the United Nations also. We hold the policy in the coordinated, but mostly meet the specific needs from the developing countries. This is an example. The data sharing principles is endorsed last year. Is this doable? Is this accepted? Or are there any some problem in the implementation dimension? So this is an example. So we make this action, and not only put this principle there, but we put it into the action. So we initially to start the global change research data publishing and the repository. We have the DOI, so register. The organizer is Institute of Geographical Science and Natural Resources Research in Chinese Academy of Sciences, and also in the Geographical Society of China. We also have partners, the CODATA task group in developing countries. There are more than 20 countries join this. And also GenQuart in Kenya, and also this National Data Sharing Platform of China, and the Digital Linchao Geo Museum is joint supported by the International Geographical Union and the CODATA. So we all work together to focus on the global change research data. This is research data mostly from scientists. You know, in the government data, scientist data, and also private data. We are focused on the research data. So many scientists, they really want to share data, but it's somebody else's data. Very few people, they want to give the data to somebody else. This is a big problem. So, so we work on this data publishing. What is our contribution in this action? We have 4 value added. One is peer review. All the data is peer reviewed by experts. It's ensure the data quality is good. And then make the data reliable to be reused. Second value added is data and the data paper together make the data more information. We publish the data online in the digital. At the same time, we publish the data paper with the journal. So as a brother sister. So one data set, digital data published, and then they publish the data paper in the journal, both in the digital and in the hard copy. Second value added is we have DOI registration and repository. In this way, the intellectual property is protected, and the long-term the data preservation keep that. So the scientists, you publish data, you will anytime you can find your data online. So scientists, they are very happy. They don't need to keep their data in their computer. And the third one, the fourth one is data sharing services. We provide data sharing services. Three kind of groups got the services. One is for the end user, or everybody. And the next one is value-added service providers. And the next one is the authors. We also provide service for the authors, contributors. What kind of data we have? 1 year, we published 57 data sets, some in the global scale, continental scale, and the regional scale, national scale, even local scale, different kinds. And some in the biodiversity, land cover, climate change, human dimension, like population and GDP, and so on. So there's so diversity. So many fields are related to the global change. So for example, one of them is Global Land 30. This is 30 meters resolution in the global land cover data. This is published and also is accepted by the United Nations and broader disseminated and used in the United Nations. So also have some people complain that the China data very hard to get. But now it's gradually more and more data is peer review data is come. For example, time series ecosystem data, time series population data, time series and GDP data, and so on. What's the data policy? So when you publish data, how to use the data? What data policy? We have 3 policies. One is impractical. One is free download the data, and the data is free downloadable for everyone through the internet within 3 clicks, because the data is so many. So sometimes it's some website is click. The last, the metadata only. So this is terrible. So we make this all data published, only 3 links, within 3 links. First link, you got a search page. Second link, you got the abstract. You only few minutes, you see what the data is, if you are interested or not. If you're interested, the third link, you got the data products. So within 3, no more than 3, maximum is 3. 3 clicks, you got the data products. This is for everyone. You don't need to register. You don't need to. Computer will automatically register your download the data. Second policy is to encourage end users to use the data. We encourage, we help people to use the data subject to citation, like Simon said, the citation. Okay, this is not difficult for the users. Third one is value-added service providers. So right now, between the data and the users, there are many the specific objective services. So there are many like this. So so we are welcome such kind of services to reuse the data subject to the written permission. Written permission, that means we give the delivery right to the service providers. And then, according to the citation, some way, so we also welcome to go this way. So now, it's statistics, 1 year, we have more than 100 authors contribute their data to publish. And we have this the visitors. There are more than about 50,000 users in the visit. And also from 102 countries use the download the data. And almost 100,000 data files was downloaded. And now there are two the data providers use our data as redeliver according their own system. One is the National Data Sharing Platform of China. Another one is China GIAS. And we are also working in the processing. One is working with Jinquat, Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology and Agriculture in Kenya. Hopefully, end of this year or early of next year, we will set up system in the Jinquat, Kenya. Also, we are talking with UNEP Live. So probably we very soon we sign agreement and to do so. And also we are talking on UNESCO IOC and about the ocean and data and so on. So this and also several is come to me, but welcome to do according our the policy. So really is we want to share all of you, but not too much. Not to take too much time. This is what we are doing, and then I think that this is a good opportunity, EOE, and I think it's a good opportunity for us to discuss and how we can broad share the data and benefit society, benefit education, research, and benefit economic growth in developing countries. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. I'm Leida Reinhardt from the EEB, which stands for the European Environmental Bureau. We are the largest federation in Europe from environmental NGOs. Within the EEB, I mean, we work a lot with policy, of course, advocacy, focusing on the European Commission, trying to change the policies of the European Commission. But within the EEB, there is a unit which is called Global Policies and Sustainability, GPS, it's not by coincidence. And the GPS unit frames, let's say, all kind of environmental policies into a broader context within sustainability, but also outside Europe. So it's Europe within a wider world. I'm the director of the GPS. And I'm also quite involved in all kind of UN processes, the SDGs, but also UNEA. I'm not going to talk much about EEB because within the work I'm doing, I'm also quite involved in another project which was called EJOLT. It stands for Environmental Justice and Organizations, Liabilities and Trade. That's a network of 23 partners in even so many countries, 23 countries, but there are a lot of networks in there, so that's also, I mean, we are covering more than the 23 countries. That was a project financed by the European Commission. It's an FP7 project. That means that it is a condition to work with NGOs and scientists, research centers, university, which is, of course, collaborative research, which is absolutely necessary and very inspiring to do as well, also for an NGO. I will come back later to that. More and more we see conflicts happening in the world because, of course, of the more and more extraction for scarcest resources going to more vulnerable regions, which means that, let's say, the life at the front line, where the global north meets the global south, is getting more and more difficult. So you see more conflicts, especially in the global south, in the south. Every week, one environmental activist is killed, so that means that also those conflicts are getting more and more intensive. So it's really a problem, and what we wanted to do within the project of EJOLT is giving a voice and making this kind of conflicts visible. We call it also environmentalism of the poor, because a lot of local organizations in the South are fighting for their livelihoods. They don't call themselves environmentalists, they are just trying to survive, because often their communities or their livelihoods, their ecosystem they're living in are damaged by big, large infrastructure things or land grabbing or whatever. So what we try to do is, together with the research center and the scientists, to have a better view, a better understanding on what is really happening in this world with this, with more material flows going up and down and more global trade. This is what was one of the results of the EJOLT program. There was more, but this is the more visible thing, and that was also a result that was I was asked to present here. It's the Atlas for or of environmental justice. You see, you have seen already a lot of atlases. It's having its own life now? Okay. You see a lot of dots on the atlas. You've seen a lot of atlases already. I think it's a very nice tool of showing what's going on in the world. Here you see many, many dots on the atlas. Every dot stands for a story, a case, I mean an environmental conflict. This is going too fast. I don't know who's doing that, but yeah. It's an interactive website, so you can. I really invite you to go to the website so you can play with it. I mean, it's really interactive. You can search on commodities, you can search on countries, you can search on companies who are involved. You can search on what the intensity of the conflict is. Is it still a conflict in potential, which can still be solved, or is it already something that is even a victory? Because there are 20% of the dots you see here on the map are victories as well. I mean, that's of course our main goal of doing this project. We are not so interested in conflicts. We are interested in avoiding conflicts or finding solution for this kind of conflicts. As NGO, we are, of course, interested in changing policies, changing our financial systems, changing our whole trade system. And every dot you see here, or 80% of them, are cases of bad policies or a lack of legal frameworks. As I said, the Atlas in practice, we divided the several conflicts in several topics, like nuclear conflicts, minerals, waste management. I mean, you can read the whole list. And as I said, you can filter and search on the several things. When you go to one of the dots, you can zoom into the conflict, so you can read the story or who is involved, how long is it already happening. You can go with street view, I think it's called. You can really zoom into the place where it is. It gives you really a lot of information, and I think that's very important because we want to make this this map as visible as well, and make also the people struggling on the front line. Making them visible as well. It is also often used by journalists because it gives a load of information. The information is checked and fact-checked and scientific proof, whatever you can call it, because the University of Barcelona is involved in this project. They have 3 people working on this atlas as well. So if an organization or a community somewhere in the world wants to upload a case because they want to give their case, their conflict, more presence, they want to work on more awareness raising on what's going on, they have to contact the university. They look at it, they see if all the dates are correct. So it's not a kind of free upload. It's not if you have a conflict with your neighbor that you can put it on the map. There is also a certain scale, of course, of the conflict as well. So there has to be in community or a neighborhood or a city or whatever involved. And there has to be a conflict, so there has to be another party as well. That can be the government, it can be a company, that can be an investment bank or whatever, or all together. So it's a moderated atlas, so all the cases are fact-checked, and that is very important for us to make the whole atlas credible and reliable. Once the information is on the map, there is also a whole machinery behind to give that information, that it flows to policymakers, to press, so that it's also on the local newspapers, it's there so that people can do something about it. As I said, the goal of making this atlas and having the dots on the atlas is to find solutions for the problems. Another thing that happens a lot is that, let's say if there is a land grabbing case in Kenya, the victims, they now know that there is also land grabbing cases in other countries, so they can communicate with each other and see what they do with each other. You have often laws that can avoid or at least can help them, like in one of the cases was in Kazakhstan, where the communities did not know about the existence of the Aarhus Convention. Of course, this audience knows that we have Principle 10 and that in the UNEC we have the Aarhus Convention, but a lot of those local communities don't have it. I mean, they don't have lawyers. So that's a very good tool to have this kind of exchange of information so that they can use the information that other communities or organizations used in other countries. As I said, if you want to upload a case, then you have to fill in all the information. There is a format for it. That format is now in several languages because we saw that there was a language problem before. We only had it in English and Spanish. Now we also have it in Russian and Chinese and French. So countries that are, I mean, especially the local communities that do not speak English or Spanish, they can also upload it in their, well, in the language I just mentioned. Of course, there are still a lot of other languages as well, but I mean, it's a start. The EGIL project was, apart from the atlas, was also a research project. So the result is also, I think, 20 or 30 publications on the several topics with policy recommendations. I was more involved in the policy recommendation work, not so much in the research work, but as an NGO, I think that's legitimate. We did conferences, we have articles in journals, a lot of press coverage, and as you see, we also have contacts on the highest level, at least within the Catholic community, because the one you see on the right hand is a judge from Argentina, and he was on the secondary school with the Pope when he was still not the Pope. So we were invited when we had a meeting in Rome, and as you see, the Pope is also against fracking. Do this kind of research work and data collection is very important for both sides. It's interesting for the research community, for the scientists, but it's also very important for the NGOs or the local communities. For the research, it's interesting because it gives them a better view on what is really happening on the ground. It's also detecting trends. If you have a lot of dots coming on fracking problems, fracking conflicts, then you can see that something is going wrong there. So you can, I don't have the time now, but you can see trends in several things. Also for the mining companies, I mean, over the mining conflicts. I mean, you see more and more really intensive mining conflict. It's not a protest anymore. I mean, it's really about activists being killed. You also see the correlation between policies versus conflicts and solutions. I mean, in countries where you have good legal frameworks or interesting policies, I mean, in our point of view, then you also see, of course, less conflicts. I mean, there is absolutely a correlation between that. You can also see the relation between consumption and production patterns and resource attraction. We did several, I mean, one of the publications, the scientific publications, is about material flows. You can see that it's getting more and more and more. So the material flows and the financial flows are going from the global south to the global north, which is, I think, a very interesting thing to see. But it's also good to see in the map that it gives more conflicts, of course, in the south, because the companies need to have their resources from somewhere, so it gives more tension on the ground. But also very interesting to see is that activist knowledge, I mean, concepts where NGOs come with, like biopiracy. Vandana Shiva launched that concept. It's not only an NGO concept anymore. I mean, the research community took it over and are now researching on what is biopiracy and giving it a definition so they can use it also in policy work. Ecological debt, I'm working on that concept for, I think, for more than 15 years now. I started to mention that in the UN meetings I had. It was really kind of what is he talking about, ecological debt. Now it's mentioned by governments from the South claiming for their ecological debt. There are a lot of literature already on how to measure ecological debt. So that means that it's a lot of concepts coming from grassroots organizations are now a kind of common language, or at least it's used in policy work. The same for climate justice. But also the other way around. When you have a contact between the NGOs and the research community, NGOs don't always have the resources or the time to have scientific research on things. I mean, it's a lot of things they are doing is also kind of gut feeling. And one of the examples is from Kenya, where there was a region where the government or a private investor wanted to build a big shopping mall there. The local community said, well, I don't know if that's very practical for us to have this big shopping mall, because who is going to the shopping mall? And we're also are going to lose the communities where they lived. So they could, with the help of researchers of ecological economics, they could make a cost-benefits study to show the government and the private investor that it would be better to have a kind of decentralized shopping, community. So not a big shopping mall, but just using the local shops and the local people to have a more commercial center in the same region. So they used research, ecological economics, to show that they were right in saying, well, we don't want this big shopping mall, but we want something else. So that helps, of course. The same with the Aarhus Convention, which is often used because of researchers and lawyers, of course, involved. And it also gives us stronger arguments for advocacy work. So I think this kind of work is absolutely necessary.
Lady, can I check the time?
Yeah, okay. So just to say that when we launched the Atlas, there was really a huge coverage of press. We were mentioned in 22 countries in press, I mean in national press, 150 times mentioned, also in the BBC, the big newspapers. The website is visited very often. Since 1 year now, we have 500,000 of users. Millions of clicks on the site, and the average of search is 5 minutes, which is quite long. It's not because the website is so slow, it's just because there is really a lot to search on the website. As you can see in the map, there are still a lot of empty spots. That's not because there are no conflicts or stories to tell in those regions. Absolutely there are. But the problem is that we don't have still the networks, the communication with NGOs, civil society organizations, research center working in those areas. Partly is a language problem, but partly is also a resources problem. I mean, making this kind of maps is very, very human resources intensive. So one of our ambitions is to fill in those gaps, to have a broader network of NGOs working on this, but also to work more on other issues as well, like oceans and new technologies, so that we can really make it more complete, so that it's also more interesting, I think, for researchers, as it is, the more the dots you have on the map, of course, the more credible and the more interesting the Atlas gets. I think that was it, and there you can find me if you have more questions, and you can, of course, Twitter and find us on Facebook as well. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody, and Thank you for being here, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to share some of these thoughts with you. Towards an Africa open Africa data consensus. I'm getting everything mixed up. Okay. Yeah. The outline is very simple. I'll try to show that open data is also happening in Africa. There are a lot of initiatives for open data in Africa. Then I'll touch on some of the challenges and issues that we face, and then bring in, very briefly, the Africa Data Consensus, and then what we think is the way forward. Now, I don't expect you to read all that, but there are not too many. But it shows that there are initiatives for open data or related to open data in Africa. I think the one that is most well known is the Kenya Open Data Initiative. Then there's the Africa Development Bank Group, which has worked with all the national statistical offices in Africa to install open data platforms in the offices, so that if you go to the open data platform run by the Africa Development Bank, you should be able to click on a link and get to the open data provided by each of the countries in Africa. Then there's a Code for Africa, there is Tunisia, Morocco, Tanzania. All these are open data initiatives. So Africa is also moving ahead with the rest of the world in this area. The drivers for these initiatives, some of them I've mentioned already. The Africa Development Bank Group is a big driver. The World Bank Group is helping many countries. The World Wide Web Foundation is a big player in this field, helping to make countries and practitioners aware of the Open Data Charter and how to involve open data. And it's all about connectivity. If you're not connected, you cannot do open data. So the World Wide Web Foundation is working on the Affordable Internet project with other partners, Google, Open Government, and so on. These are initiatives and drivers. The challenges we have is that the first one is that there's no policy in many of these countries. There's no policy that says this is our open data or our data policy that includes open data. And therefore, the legal framework environment is not there. The laws dealing with data and statistics are not aligned with each other. And they are not aligned with the current concepts and thoughts in the data revolution. That's a big challenge for us. And then I'm going to touch on the business model, that there's no business model behind it. It's all about government. And I remember one of the presentations yesterday had a very important slide that says, governments don't have a monopoly on valuable information. Most of the models we have there are still based on government doing it. And then there's no cross-government ownership or buy-in. So you find that many of those ones are run either by an NSO, the National Statistical Office, or the ICT agency or authority in the country. Some of them are from the administrative data agencies. There are a lot of them that are donor-driven, and then some that are young, what we call hacktivists, who are trying to make things happen. But there's no ownership that says government commits to open data in any of those countries, any of the initiatives we have, and that's our challenge. The best-known open data evangelist in Africa is Ndemo from Kenya. And I call this testimony because he's been going around trying to expound this vision, this message of open data. And he talks about the experience they had in the early days of this now famous Kenya Open Data Initiative, that at that time, because the enabling legislation is not there, because the enabling environment is not there, he actually had to buy data from government department to load on the system. And that's the challenge we have. How do we change all that? Do we want only government data to be open? The Africa Data Consensus thinks about all data, not just government data. So, what do we think we should do? The first thing we said in the Africa Data Consensus is that, or not the first thing, but one of the things we said is that to implement that, remember that it's in the context of the data revolution, that we need the government to, first of all, make a commitment that they commit to the data revolution and open data as part of that. That's a very important starting point, that we commit to that. And then once we commit to that, we need governments to formulate, or if there are laws already, to revise existing laws and policies that says, here is our policy for opening up our data. Earlier today in the presentation by Enrico, he mentioned that enabling environment. It's very important. If you do not have a commitment and enabling environment that says, we allow this to happen, then no matter what you do, it will not happen. So we need to review all practices, laws, and regulations. And I put in the word practices because sometimes things are done that may not be in the law, and it's just a practice that has come over the years, administrative practice or some other practice. So we need to review those practices. We need to review the laws, we need to review the regulations that relate to statistics and data generally. Identify these misalignments I talked about. There are misalignments between the different laws. Identify those misalignments. Review the current concepts that are coming up in the data revolution area. This concept of leave no one behind, make everybody accountable, make the government accountable. How do our laws relate to that? Because we find in some cases, people are good in terms of, they say, oh, the law does not allow me to do that. Or it becomes something that people use to hide behind not wanting to do something. But most importantly, and I think, now this is not contradicting what everybody is saying about the importance of science and technology and capacity building. No, it's not contrary, but it's very important for us that we nurture the innovation of our youth. We have a lot of youth who have enthusiasm, and some of them do not have formal education, but they have this innovation. And I'll give you, almost everybody here will have received an email telling you about making money. Those people don't have IT education, but they go to a lot of lengths to develop those research skills to find out about you and send that email. Imagine if we can channel them towards this area. We call them Yahoo boys in Nigeria. Can you imagine that army of people working in this area trying to help us make data available? The average person, when they think about poverty, it means having no money. And the government is not there to do everything for us. I think, some of you will agree with me, I'm sure if you will disagree also, but I think that the role of government is to create an environment for us to make money, for us to do what we need to do, not for them to give us money. They will not give you money. They create the environment for you to make money. And by opening data, people can now start thinking about the business model. That's why I said earlier, the business model is important. And I want to draw the example from GPS. I'm a land surveyor by training. I started as a land surveyor. And in the 80s, GPS was the exclusive tool of surveyors and geodesists and the military. In those days, you need to plan a day in advance where you are going to observe for just the coordinates of one point. Now we have GPS as a mass business enabler. Every business now depends on GPS. Everybody now depends on GPS. Anybody that has this uses GPS. Because the American government changed the rules and say, hey, let this technology be open. Remove that P code restriction and let businesses innovate. And we find that because of that simple rule change, we have businesses that developed, plow money into that. The ones that people know mostly are the Google Maps, the turn-by-turn directions. Almost every logistics company has their own navigation software. It only became possible because GPS was opened up to people. And we think from our Africa Data Consensus work that that is what we need to do for data. Yes, when GPS became open, it did not kill the business of geodesists. It did not remove the National Mapping Agency. They're still there. They still write papers. They still do research. And that one is still published under all the rules of research and government control. But now it's open. Now we have businesses developing. And now sometimes we cannot go any place without looking at our cell phone to see where am I going. Now, a few principles from the Africa Data Consensus, so many of them, I'm not going to go into all of that, just say a few principles that relate to open data. The Africa Data Consensus is simply a set of rules that say these are principles that if we observe will help us implement the data revolution. So let's remember it's about data revolution generally, not just open data revolution. But there are a few of them that relate to the Open Data Initiative. One of them says that political will is pivotal to the implementation of the Africa Data Revolution. If you do not have the political will, it won't happen. So countries must own the prioritization, financing, and leadership of this data revolution. And what we say is that the priorities will differ from country to country. There's no one-size-fits-all. We have a global direction we're going, but still, when it comes to the real on-the-ground implementation, priorities will change from one country to another, and that country should be able to define that priority. This one has been said many times in the course of this conference, that official data should be open by default. We're not saying that all data should be open, but by default it should be open. If you want it closed, you now have to justify why it is restricted. But let it be open by default if it has been produced with public funds. And we say that African governments should acknowledge open data provided by credentialed data communities. This is one important concept that we've introduced in the discourse, the concept of data communities, that no one agency can produce all the data that we need to make sure we leave no one behind. And you cannot get all data and try to force the statistics offices to start producing them. They are already overwhelmed with the official statistics they're producing. So let's develop the concept of data communities so that we allow experts in different fields to produce data in their own areas and make them available to the common port for us to solve problems. And of course, technology, new forms of data, and new other innovative ways should be actively embraced. So what do we do as a concrete action? Embrace this Africa Data Consensus. I didn't go through that, but I gave you the web link where you can download and read that. Embrace the principles there. Convene national stakeholder consultations. Revise the laws. Then open data to encourage businesses outside the government enclave. But remember, everything must be underpinned by national policy with explicit provisions for open licenses, governance, partnerships, and capacity building. And I'll close by making a plug for a report that we want to produce from next year as part of opening data and the data revolution. We want to start producing an Africa data report that will review the data ecosystem and see how are we going in making sure the data revolution is happening. And we welcome partnerships. So if you want to be part of that, please talk to us, and we'll see how we can work with different people who are experts in this area to produce this report regularly. Thank you.
If I may, please have the mic here. We're going to take just a couple more minutes and take some questions from the audience. If anybody has a question for the panelists, please let us know. I see one right here.
Ahmed Mahmoud Muhammad Isa, the chair of the Live Data City Organization, and it is a part of the telecenter movement where more than 100,000 telecenters in 52 countries and 72 networks, and 6 regional networks are sharing knowledge, experience, and best practices and data for the development of marginalized and underserved community. What we are saying, if this data is needed to be more useful, it should be applicable. And one of the things that we are doing in the centers, we have shared the data of developing an e-agriculture project where we get a database for 10,000 large-scale farmers in Gadarif State mechanization scheme. And that data actually help in facilitating the transactions between the farmers and the Gadarif Mechanized Agriculture Corporation. Also, it helped the policymaker to get 16 agricultural reports in few minutes that they can decide what to do for the agriculture in that area of Sudan. This agricultural data, it is an open source that everyone can share it because we are doing it for free. The best thing about that, it solves the conflict between the farmers and the shepherd and the forest, because we are using GIS in the demarcation of all the critical altitudes in that area. The best thing about this sharing knowledge is that we facilitate the transactions between the farmers, the community, our community, and the government, so that we can improve the quality of agriculture, the quality of food services, the quality of food security in that area. My advice, I was one of those who are working as a group in the sustainable development media, because we have been working for that conference, which is 15 days ago. I was a partner in more than 5 or 6 discussion groups. And the best thing that the UN Sustainable Development Group, they have make an open source for initiatives to be submitted to that website by any stakeholder. I think Iron Earth is deserved to be one of the initiatives that can be submitted on that website. You can find my website also, it is submitted in that initiative. Up to yesterday, there are more than 1,700 initiatives, and I think there are many initiatives in this Iron Earth. It can be submitted, and it can work on the track of the sustainable development, how it can be achieved within the next 15 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comment on the statement from the floor? All right, given that we're breaking into your lunch period, one final question, if there is one. There we are.
Thank you. Bartholomew Judd from the European Investment Bank. Considering a lot of information is in environmental impact assessments, have you come across good methodologies to try and extract this data? Bill, you mentioned that the US government has gone through a process of putting a lot of data online. I just wondered if maybe there were effective techniques for drawing this data out from what might be quite a diverse collection of different types of data. Thank you.
Just a quick answer. We have most of the work that's done in environmental impact assessments online. I don't know if there's been a tool developed that scrapes that database using any particular terminology or not, but it's certainly there as a part of the data.gov and the EPA holdings as an open source. So with that, let me thank our panelists, and I want to ask one question of each of the panelists, if we could do a quick answer, and then we'll let everybody go to lunch. The question's simple. what activity, what action do you think that your organization or you can be taking over the next year as we work towards the World Forum on Sustainability Data scheduled for Kenya in September of next year? If there's a simple thing, a particular action that you think you can do in concert with others or within your organization, please let us know about it, and we'll look for a quick answer from each of you, please. Simon?
So I think the things that I mentioned are contributing towards that, the policy. And actually, but I think Dozy put it the most succinctly. The need for a policy framework, the need for a legal framework, and the need for business cases. That is what we're trying to address in the Science International activity and that policy framework that I mentioned. And I think that's a broad contribution to capacity building on the level of a research ecosystem. And I think that is necessary for the sort of response to climate change, information development, data gathering that needs to be addressed in that data forum.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, as a lawyer who has worked on open data policy for 30 years, I completely agree with all that, and would continue to promote and advise institutions and governments on how to do that.
Professor Liu?
Yeah, we have two actions next year. One is we will develop the guideline of the data sharing principles implementation guideline. Hopefully, end of this year, we will have something. We will have a product. And the second one, we will have continue to publish the data, and the strong in the infrastructure in developing countries, the data sharing infrastructure. So especially for the through the data publishing, and in the mirror side or the provider working with add value service providers. So this we already on the plan. Yeah.
Thank you. Leda?
Thank you. I think it's also maybe a little bit an answer on your question as well. I think what is important if we do environmental impact assessment, that we add the social component as well. So I would really ask for sustainability impact assessments, where you have also more the participation for the communities or the ones who are maybe affected in whatever policy. I think you cannot put life in an Excel sheet, so it's absolutely necessary that we have also the stories behind it, and making a deeper analysis. I think, of course, this all has to lead to better policies and stronger legal frameworks, and not only the stronger policies, but also more policy coherence, because there is also a weak point, or at least the elephant in the room is the non-policy coherence.
From my end, you remember I said that commitment is important, and we are working towards getting that, even though it's called an Africa Data Consensus, it has not been signed as a consensus document, so we're working towards getting through the intergovernmental processes. So that next month at the meeting of the Committee of Director General of Statistics, is going to present it to them, and we hope that they will adopt it, and then through that we go to the Summit of Heads of State in January, because the meeting that led to that Africa Data Consensus was actually requested by the Summit of Heads of State for us to go and organize that high-level conference on data regulation. So if we have that consensus and have it signed off, then to make it easier for governments to now start formulating policies. But let me just touch a little bit about the question that was asked earlier, that the open data movement make a point that just having data on the internet does not make it open data. There are certain requirements that include being able to access it using appropriate tools. So I don't know about data.gov, but I'm sure that because US is one of the biggest players in this field, that they will also make the data available. Increasingly, big data publishers are providing APIs that allow people to be able to harvest their data automatically. So I'm sure that will happen. So once you embrace the open data, it means that PDF is not an open data. It has to go in a form that people can actually programmatically access the data and use it.
Thank you, Dozy. Join me in thanking the panelists. Thank you, everybody, for listening to us this morning.